Okay, can you see my presentation now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. So in this slide, we show some of the partners in the InnoFoodAfrica project that we are working with. And of course, this is University of Pretoria, among others. So the topic is determinant of food choice, the big picture. So as we prepared this talk, we wanted to show the global perspective on the factors that really affect food choices. So by way of objective, the first one is to set the determinants of food choice in big picture. The second one is placing food choice and sensor perception in too much used models in consumer science. So which means we're going to focus, there are multiple of them, but we're going to focus on only two models that are common in consumer science. One of the models is frequently used for marketing. Okay, thank you. Is frequently used for marketing students in business school. So the two key models here is biological determinism or free choice. Put differently, we can say biological determinism and free choice. In other words, we can start by a question to say, how do consumers choose from the different options available to them? In other words, when you move, for example, into a shop or in a food environment, let's call it a restaurant, how do you make your choices? One can argue and say people are intrinsically driven to act. They're intrinsically or inherently motivated to act in a certain way. For example, when you feel hungry, you know that I've got to eat. Or when you feel thirsty, you know that I've got to drink something. Maybe water, buy a soft drink and things like that. But one can say, no, people are not automatic robots. They have the willpower and the rationality to decide. So these are expressions of trying to say there are different drivers of food choice, one being biological determinism, the other being by way of making choice. And here he gave an example, and the example is how a he dog, for example, can run around to look for a mate in the neighborhood, and that is for biodeterminism, to say that in other cases, it is the hormones that drive the behavior that animals, and in this case, human beings find themselves engaged in. So that's biodeterminism. Whereas in terms of free choice, you look into the fridge, just as an example, and you see that there is one product which is already arriving at the expiry date. And instead of eating what you bought just this morning, you decide to take the one that is approaching its expiration date, and then you consume it because it is about to get expired. In that process, you are making a decision to take one at the expense of the other. So a more formal way to say this is to use two systems. The first system is called intuition, and the second one is by way of reasoning. And by intuition, this is characterized by operations that are fast, automatic, effortless, associative, implicit, which means they're not available to introspection. In other words, they are mostly automatic, they are inbuilt, and they're also governed by habit, and therefore difficult to control or to modify. Processes in this system do neither cause nor suffer from interference when combined with other tasks. So this is the biodeterminism way of making decisions or food choices in this case. Now the other system is via reasoning, which we call system 2. And these processes, they are slow, they are effortful, they are more likely to be conscious and monitored and deliberately controlled, and they're also relatively flexible and potentially rule governed. So these are the two models that can be used in making choices. So because we see that in many cases, the systems work together. You can't say I'm deciding based on a biological drive to say that I'm feeling hungry, therefore I've got to eat, or to say that I'm feeling thirsty, I must drink something. Or you can't say I'm making a decision. This is what I want. In most cases, these two systems work together and they interact and influence each other. So we see that this is leading us into the development of methods that are called implicit sensory methods, which allow us to actually measure the effortless, unconscious processes that occur inside our brains, inside our minds, when we make decisions. And like we said, they are fast, like we said, they are involuntary, and we call them implicit methods. So I'm going to show in the next slide how they are also measured nowadays. In the system 2, as you see here, and as we have already said, these are now rational decisions, steps that you take rationally by thinking effortfully in a deliberate way, and they are slow because you are entertaining different options that are available so that you arrive at a decision. And these are explicit responses. So a full understanding of the sensorial journey combines both routes, which means the implicit methods and the explicit method. So in this picture, we show that consumers' food choices are often driven by many factors. In this case, we said reasons of which consumers are not fully aware. Sometimes we know the reasons, sometimes part of the reasons why we act in certain ways we do not know. So like we have said already, implicit factors so I was trying to look for my pointer here. I'll just use the point. So the implicit methods, for example, here we see that brain physiological responses, they help us to measure the brain activity. Let's say when you are eating or when you are in a shop and you are looking at different products that you want to buy and you are deciding which one you can buy. But in an unconscious way, something is happening in the brain. So the brain activity can actually be measured. This is automatic nervous system. And sometimes we can measure the facial expressions. We can also use techniques like eye recognition to see how your eyes are moving and tracking that, which products are attracting your attention. So all these are implicit methods. And you can also use techniques like electroencephalography, mostly in the consumer side, to try and find out what are the real happenings inside the brain when someone is making choices. So then we relate those to the emotional responses like happiness, like and dislike, and sometimes neutral emotions, because some products may actually not produce any effect in terms of emotions when you eat them. Whereas some can cause you to be happy, some may cause you to feel unhappy, and emotions which are different depending on the food that one is consuming. So there are many models for food choice determination, how people make their food choices. This is the model that has already been explained by Paula, except that is in this diagram a bit simplified. Most of the details have not been included. But in the next diagram, we see the different factors that affect food choices. And most of them have already been explained very, very well. You see that at the center is where the brain activity is, what happens inside the human brain when you are deciding whether to choose one option over the other. Modeling, data integration, and coordination being influenced by the 6 factors around.
I'm to join.
Okay, thank you. By these factors. Factor number 1 is intrinsic product characteristics. Factor number 2, biological and physiological factors, and they are being further explained and exemplified. When you look at psychological factors, we look at memory, we look at cognition, we look at personal traits, and factor number 4, these are situational factors. For example, we know that the context in which the choice is being made also affects the choice taken. And factor number 5, social cultural factors. factor number 6, extrinsic product factors. This model has already been explained, which was exposed by Custer, I think initially in 2001. And you see that Paul has shown us a recent paper, I think that was in 2007. Now, another model for food choice determination, this is by Itmans in 2001. It emphasizes the same factors, food internal factors with sensory and perceptual factors. And then with food external factors, which is information, the environment or the social environment, the physical environment. And by the physical environment, for example, we're talking about the restaurants, the retails, the supermarkets, the context in which you are eating the food, the home environment, all that is the physical environment. And the personal state factor, these are biological factors, the ones that we have already alluded to, like hunger, thirst, hormones, and all other factors that are internal to the consumer, physiological factors, psychological components, and the habits. And we also have cognitive factors, which encompass knowledge and skills, attitudes, liking and preferences, anticipated consequences, and personal identity. All these affecting food choices. But we're going to focus a lot on what is relevant for marketing. And this slide we're showing the information flow. This is a kind of what you call the information processing model. We start with the stimulus at the top, and then that is followed by the sensory organs, because the stimulus is the information that we get from the environment. That information is received by our sense organ. In sensory science, of course, this is what you talk about, the sense of smell, the sense of taste, the sense of texture, hearing, all those things. The sense organ perceive the information. And when the information is perceived, it is collected first in the short-term memory, which is about, which is a very brief moment of about a millisecond to a second before it moves on to the short-term memory, which is the working memory. That is from the short memory. And in the short-term memory, the information, be it about food, about price, any attribute of a product that you are considering, moves again to the long-term memory. And this is where it is stored for a very long time. And the long-term memory is the one that is affected by forgetfulness, the interaction between the short-term memory and the long-term memory, such that when you want to buy, for example, you need to retrieve information from the long-term memory back to the short-term memory where you make the decisions. So most of the information that was used for this lecture comes from a book in consumer science called Consumer Behavior, a European outlook. Now, the consumer decision-making model that we are going to explain here is divided into three processes: the input, the process, and the output. So it's the input, process, output model. Trying to remove this is. Okay. So we start with the external influences. That is the input part. So I'm going to explain the input part, which is made up of the firm's marketing efforts, comprising of the product, promotion, price, and place. The most commonly known as the P's. Normally there used to be 3 P's, but now there are 4 P's. And then how they are affected by the social environment. So that is what I'm going to explain in the next slide. So in the first one, the input, we see that marketing focuses on these P's. How can you make your product in such a way that its sensory aspects become so appealing to the consumers. How do you look at your pricing, and how do you make use of promotion? For example, the design of the packaging, the advertising, and the place. Where do you sell, or who is going to be your target consumer for the product? Because if you just put it in a market without targeting a specific segment, it might be a complete failure. And also on packaging, as we talked about. So it's about positioning the product to the right people in the market. And like we said, this is affected by socio-cultural inputs or socio-cultural factors, which includes the family, informal sources, and other non-commercial sources. You also have to think about the social class to which the product is going to be targeting, and the culture and subcultures, because we know that if products are not made to match or fit a specific cultural target group, they may not succeed. So the next stage, we're looking at the processing. Now, when you give input to the consumer in the decision-making process, the consumer is going to be like a central processing unit. In other words, what is happening in the mind is deciding, making decision. But that process of making decision before buying includes need recognition. By need recognition, I mean to say, do I really need this product? If it is a food product, do I have a need for it? So you are weighing different options, whether it's a luxury, whether it's a need, whether it's something that you can't do without. And then from that, you need to make some pre-purchase search. Can I buy it? Can I not? What are the factors that I am looking at? And that is affected by the motivation to say, why am I buying it? Why am I doing it? Is it going to make me happy? Is it going to provide energy to me? Is it going to make me healthy? Am I saving on money? Is it an inconvenient product? A number of motivational factors come into play on this one. And also the issue of perception. Perception is your thoughts and feelings towards the product. How do you perceive it? It's not only about sensations. Of course, during input, the sensory aspects from the product gives you an idea about the product and helps in decision-making process. But perception, now you are taking into consideration not only the sensory properties, but also even previous experiences, all the information that you know about that project, that product, and then you make a decision. Also, it is affected by learning, which is the information that you have about the product and what it can do to your body, for example. And then personality. As a person, do you like the product or not? We know that some people are more drawn towards certain types of products than others, and the attitude. And also the experience, for example, if you had used the product before, and then that helps you in your decision-making process. And in the process, this is what I was just explaining in the pre-processing activities that go on. And after pre-purchase search, you carry out an evaluation of the alternatives that are there. Because wherever you are making a decision to buy something or to consider to take something, there will be alternatives. So there are two models used in marketing. The first one is you evaluate a list of brands or products which are available. And we have what we call the evoked set of brands. And this is what usually comes to the mind. And it's evoked because it brings into memory your previous experiences. And this, like we said, are very important because they are likely to be chosen first because you have interacted with them before. You know how the product tastes, even sometimes the cost, the convenience associated with that product. The next one is a list of criteria set in advance. You go to a shop or to a mall with something written down or in your mind already to say, I want this product with these characteristics, not necessarily looking at the brand. So I'm going to look at the first one. evoked set as a subset of all brands in a product class. So this is what happens when you want to buy something. You have all the brands and your mind quickly runs to the non-brands, those that you are normally used to. And in the non-brands, there is acceptable brands, which is the evoked set. They are the ones that are usually accepted. You have accepted them because you know them, you have information about them, and you have used them before, and you have appraised them. And you also have the unacceptable brands. They are known, but there are those that are acceptable. And then there are known, those that are unacceptable. There are those that you know, but you are indifferent about them. And then those that you know, but you overlook, you don't even take time to consider them. They don't attract your attention. So you move on from the acceptable brands and then you go to purchase the brands. This is the one that you purchase. And acceptance, we know obviously, is a result, chief among its other factors, of the sensory characteristics of those brands. So this is why sensory and consumer science becomes important even in marketing. And the last part is now the output in the input process and output information processing model. And in this part, we see that the output is when you have actually decided in your mind, now you can purchase, point number one here. If you are purchasing for the first time, you give it a try. So it's a trial purchase. You go, you prepare the food, you eat, you evaluate your experience with that food in terms of the taste, in terms of the texture, in terms of the eating experience, in terms of the motivations that you had and the anticipations you had before buying the product. So that is the first thing. And then if you try it and find that it's good for you, of course, post-purchase evaluation is what you do. And then if the experience is good, you come back again and you buy it. And then repeat sales are now depending on your previous experience. How have you experienced the product? Was it good for you? Was it fitting the anticipations which we had before buying the product? Which means if the link or the match between the anticipations and the experiences are congruent, you are likely to have repeat purchases. You keep on buying the product. But if there is a mismatch between the anticipations before you buy and the experiences when you bought the product and consumed it, then it means you are not going to repeat buying the product. So on post-decision behavior, this is what I was just explaining, to say it helps you to buy the product again, to come back to the shop, to come back to the manufacturer, to come back to the supplier and keep buying the product because it was good, it met your expectations. And this is where most marketing people may miss it, because if the sensory perceptions and the liking are not considered, then people may not buy the product because the decision to buy goes beyond price, it goes beyond brand. This is why even some brands that are well established, you find that they may collapse when sensory characteristics of products, amongst other factors, have not been satisfied or have deteriorated. And this is when you begin to see a lot of customer complaints coming in about the product characteristics. So buying a product more than 3 times is actually creating a habit. So by playing around with the sensory characteristics of products and ensuring that you are optimizing them, and not only optimizing them at the expense of other more important or equally important characteristics like health concerns, sustainability, but co-optimizing all these things together, one is assured of making sure that the consumers continue to like the product, and a habit to buy the product, a habit to eat the product is created. So Consumer science can be applied, as you see, at the processing level of the input, process, and output model. It can also be applied at the output level in this decision-making process. How do marketers or product manufacturers apply sensor science at this stage? At perception. Perception is actually about the interaction of the product itself with the consumer, the experience of the consumer with the product. And this means that by designing and optimizing the sensory characteristics of the product, by so doing, you are actually enhancing its perceptive properties so that it becomes more likable, people can buy it, people can interact with it, and then they can try it. And if it is good, you have repeat sales. They come, they keep on buying the product. So at this stage, you use sensory descriptive testing, because you have, in order to optimize the perceptual properties of the product, you should be able to, one, define them. What are they? Verbalize them, and then quantify them. And then when you're able to quantify them, then you can use sensory descriptive analysis for doing all that, to create your specs that you keep consistent, like what was explained in Cecil Petit's presentation. Now, at the output level, that's where consumer testing becomes more important, because the first, at trial level, before even launching, you want to trial with a small group, and then you go to a larger group of consumers, and then you can even do further consumer tests to confirm whether the product is still being liked. Let's say after 6 months, after 1 year, after 2 years. So consumer tests, they keep you calibrated in terms of whether your product is still performing as expected and how it is comparing with other market leaders. So to summarize, food choice is a very complex process. And when we start consumer behavior, we always have to be aware of the factors that may affect our experience and to try and control for, or to understand as many as possible. And this is what Riet commented in a previous lecture, to say sometimes it's very difficult to control some of the noise. That could be important information, but if it's not the information we are studying in a specific study, it becomes noise, because we can't control it so that we see the effect of varying the factors of interest. So that's how important it is. So we can have questions now. Let me check for questions in the chat. If anyone has questions, please, you can raise up your hand now. It's time for questions. I do not seem to see any questions, and thanks, Barisa, for that comment. So if we don't have questions now, I think I can stop the recording. Okay. Let me check one more moment.
I have a question, but it's too long to write. If by summarizing, it says that it's really complex and it's really hard to.
Is that a question?
Yeah. If it's really hard to control.
So sorry, I can't hear. Let me increase my. Yes, come again.
If we summarize that food choice is very complex and it's really hard to control,
Yes.
What can we do to control all these factors that are not in our control?
Yes, so that's a very good question. It's, it remains complex to control them. Of course, we are able to control these factors in the lab environment, in academia, in our test labs, in industry and things like that, because we are analyzing one factor at a time and then we're keeping all other factors constant. But in reality, when we are not working with food models, when we are working with the real food, for example, in a food environment, when people go to a restaurant to eat, obviously there is a lot of information and factors that is coming, for example, from the environment itself. Sometimes it's the music in the restaurant. Sometimes it's the colors, even the colors of the walls inside the restaurant itself. So sensor science by nature is multidisciplinary and multifactorial. So it's very complex to really bring all the factors under control. I think this is why we find a lot of multivariate research methods in sensor science, because they allow us to consider all the variables or most of the variables coming from around the system, which can have an impact on the study. So I think that's the strength of the field itself, because if you use multivariate methods, uh, you can capture information about the environment, you can capture information about the physical chemistry of the samples, you can capture information about the population target and so many things, and use techniques like PCA and other more advanced to see the patterns and which factors are affecting what.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, madam. Do we have any more questions? Okay, so thank you so much, colleagues. I stop the presentation, the recording now, and we meet next week in the next lecture.
Okay, thank you.